months ago I built this shrimp ecosphere. The plan was to create a system in which the plants and the shrimp kept each other alive. Unfortunately, this plan was short-lived. Only a week after the initial setup, the shrimp died. However, I kept the setup running in the hopes it could somehow sustain itself. 4 months later, the setup looks like this. At first glance it might not look too bad, but I assure you, all of these plants have turned to goo. Waste has also been collecting at the water's surface, which has begun to mold. Needless to say, this tank is in dire need of a redo. So let's take this bad boy outside so we can clean it. Quick rinse with water and this container is good to go. But before we can go back inside, I want to make a new batch of terrarium substrate. So I filled up 2 buckets with water and carefully unpacked the substrate blocks. After they've been soaked, I mixed them together with some play sand and some small pieces of bark. With all of that out of the way, we can finally go back inside. I gave the jar a quick wipe down with some isopropyl alcohol and now we're all set. Alright, this thing looks brand new, so let's go ahead and turn it into a beautiful piece of nature. The first step is to add a drainage layer. This will prevent excess water from turning the substrate into a muddy mess. Next we want to create a barrier on top of the drainage layer. I'm using this geotextile fabric, but it doesn't really matter what you use, as long as it prevents the substrate from mixing with the drainage layer, while simultaneously allowing water to pass. A little tip here is to cut the fabric slightly larger than the area you want to cover. This way you can fold it up alongside the edges, making it easier to keep the substrate in place. Next we're going to add a layer of charcoal. This will help purify the system as well as be the main residence of the cleanup crew we're adding later. With the charcoal in place, it's time to add a few handfuls of substrate. I'm sloping it up towards the back to create more depth. For the hardscape I want to use this piece of spiderwood, but it doesn't really fit in a container. And it also doesn't fit like this. And it still doesn't fit like this. So off to the shed we go. Perfect. This end over here is also way too clean. That's better. Unfortunately, it still doesn't fit. There we go. A little bit of brute force made this piece fit. I ended up placing the wood like this, which wasn't my original plan, but inspiration struck and I think this looks way better. It definitely has nothing to do with the fact this piece is too big and can be oriented any other way. So let's quickly continue before anybody notices. To cover up the substrate, I got a few patches of this beautiful bright green moss. I'm not too good at IDing moss species, but I believe this is hypnum moss. Next I added a little bit more substrate behind the piece of wood and added a few cuttings of pilea. However, the angle made it quite hard to plant with these long tweezers. And while I got my short tweezers, my cat saw an opportunity to do a little quality control on this setup. Let's check in to see what she thinks. Hey Frikkie, what do you think of my terrarium?
I think you should crunch that subscribe button and join the fern family.
I guess that means we're good to go. So I continued adding more plants. In the middle of the terrarium I wanted to add a really small piece of this Opiapogon Kyoto. This is typically sold as an aquarium plant, but I found it holds up extremely well above water. In fact, a lot of aquarium plants tend to do pretty well out of water, as long as there's ample humidity. Next, I'm adding a few cuttings of this Fittonia pink vein. I would have liked to add more of these, but this is all I had on hand. Next I added a seed pod. I don't know what plant this came from, but you can find it at most reptile expos. I think some oak leaf creeping fig would also be perfect for this setup. Might seem small now, but over time this plant will grow all over the wood. I also added some Anubias nana between the moss and some Bucephalendra behind the wood. Both of these plants are also typically sold as aquarium plants, but again, they will do just fine in this kind of environment. I also crammed some moss behind the wood to prevent the roots of the Bucephalendra from drying out. Next I added another small Anubias and finished it off with a few small botanicals. To ensure the long-term success of this setup, I'm also adding a cleanup crew. This will consist of isopods and these teeny tiny white dots called springtails. Together they will eat any mold or decaying matter present in the setup. A quick spray down and wipe down later and this tank is complete. And there you go, another beautiful terrarium finished. I really hope you enjoyed this week's video, and if you're hungry for more content, I recommend you go watch this video next to see how we initially set up this jar. I'll see you there.